We begin with disasters so large that they did not simply kill living things. They rewrote the shape of the planet. A sea became a desert. A homeland became the bottom of the ocean. A green world turned into sand and stone. 6. The Zanclean Flood. When the Atlantic fell into a Dead Sea, about 5.33 million years ago, the Mediterranean was not the blue inland sea we know today. It had nearly vanished. Not shrunk, not lowered, vanished. When the Strait of Gibraltar was sealed, the Mediterranean basin was cut off from the Atlantic. Over immense spans of time, evaporation kept doing its silent work. The water retreated into isolated pools, then into salt flats, until the basin became a vast white wound between Europe, Africa, and Western Asia. Imagine a place that had once been sea, now sitting far below the surrounding continents. A deep, overheated bowl layered with salt, hostile to most complex life. No waves, no ships, no peaceful shoreline, just heat, mineral crust, and an abyss where a sea should have been. Then the barrier at Gibraltar failed. The Atlantic began to pour through. At first, perhaps it was only a channel of water cutting through a weakness in the land. But water digs as it falls. The channel widened, the flow intensified, a breach became a cataract, and an ocean began falling into a geological hole. Scientific models suggest that, at its peak, the flow may have dwarfed any flood in recorded human history. Sea level inside the Mediterranean basin may have risen by meters per day in some regions. A dry, burning, salt-covered world was buried under water in a geological instant. What makes the Zanclean Flood feel so unsettling is that it happened long before humans. No one stood on the cliffs to record the sound. No myth preserved it. Yet the seafloor still holds the evidence. Thick evaporate layers, strange sediments, and signs that the Mediterranean dried out and was born again. Later, civilizations would grow around that reborn sea. Egyptians, Greeks, Phoenicians, Romans, and countless coastal cultures would sail, trade, fish, fight, and build along shores shaped by this catastrophe. One of the most important stages of ancient history exists, because a natural barrier failed and the ocean rushed in. When you look at the Mediterranean today, you see a sea. Beneath that ordinary surface lies the memory of an abyss drowned by the Atlantic. 5. The Toba Supervolcano. When the sky may have pushed humanity toward extinction. Around 74,000 years ago, in what is now Sumatra, the Earth opened a wound large enough to affect the world. The Toba Supervolcano erupted. This was not an ordinary eruption with a plume above a mountain and a few rivers of lava. Toba was the kind of event that forced the planet to react. It blasted enormous volumes of ash and volcanic material into the atmosphere. The collapsed caldera later became Lake Toba, a vast scar still visible in the landscape. But the most dangerous part was not only where the volcano exploded, it was what rose into the sky. Ash and sulfur compounds can dim sunlight, cool temperatures, shift rainfall, and disrupt food chains. For early humans living by hunting, gathering, and reading the rhythms of nature, a darkened sky lasting for years would have been almost impossible to understand. Plants would have struggled, animals would have moved or died. Water sources could have been contaminated by ash. Old migration routes and hunting patterns would no longer mean what they used to mean. Early humans had very few layers of protection between themselves and the environment. If one link in the food chain snapped, an entire group could face hunger. A famous hypothesis suggests that Toba may be connected to a severe population bottleneck in human history. In simple terms, the number of breeding humans on Earth may once have fallen to a dangerously low level. The theory remains debated, because some archaeological evidence shows that human communities survived through the eruption in several regions. But the eruption itself and its enormous scale are not in doubt. Pause on that for a moment. Every city, language, kingdom, memory, and every person watching this exists because enough early humans survived a time when the sky, the climate, and the food supply may all have turned against them. Toba is frightening, not only because it was huge. It is frightening because of the question it leaves behind. If Earth had pushed only a little harder, would our story ever have begun? 4. Doggerland. The homeland swallowed by the North Sea. In 1931, a fishing trawler working in the North Sea pulled up something that did not belong on the seafloor, a barbed antler point shaped by human hands. It had not drifted there by accident. It came from a lost land. That land is called Doggerland. At the end of the Ice Age, when sea levels were far lower than they are today, Britain was not yet an island. Between Britain and mainland Europe stretched a wide lowland plain filled with rivers, marshes, woods, lakes, game animals, and Mesolithic communities. To them, Doggerland was not a bridge between Britain and Europe. It was home. People hunted across its grasslands. They followed deer, wild horses, aurochs, and other animals. They fished in rivers, made camps near lakes, and buried their dead in places that mattered. If you had lived there, you would not have thought you were standing on a land destined to vanish. You would have thought the world had always been that way. Then the ice melted, and the sea began to rise. Not in a single night. That is what makes it haunting. The water advanced across generations. A hunting ground became marsh. A path was cut by water. A campsite had to be abandoned. Elders may have remembered walking across places that their grandchildren knew only as sea. Gradually, Doggerland shrank into low islands and wet ground. A community can adapt once, it can move twice, but when the homeland itself is sinking beneath your feet, adaptation only buys time. Today, archaeologists reconstruct Doggerland through geological data, sediment cores, and objects pulled from the sea floor. Animal bones, stone tools, and traces of people who lived there before water erased their map. Doggerland is sad and frightening because it did not die with one explosion. It died by retreat. People left piece by piece, abandoning camps, paths, graves, and memories until the sea covered everything. If a culture lived there, we hear only a faint echo of it now, not because they had no stories, but because those stories lie beneath meters of cold water. 3. Storegga, the wave that may have finished the last of Doggerland. If Doggerland was a world already dying, the Storegga slide may have been its final blow. Around 8,150 years ago, off the coast of Norway, a massive section of the continental shelf suddenly collapsed into the deep ocean. This was a submarine landslide. It did not happen on a visible mountain. It did not send rocks crashing past villages. It gave no clear warning to anyone standing on shore. Beneath the water, the seafloor gave way, and when that much sediment moves into the deep sea, it pushes the ocean aside. A tsunami formed. Geological deposits show that the Storegga tsunami struck parts of the North Atlantic with waves that may have reached enormous heights. Norway, Shetland, Scotland, and other coastlines felt its force, but the most vulnerable place may have been the last low remnants of Doggerland. Picture a low, wet landscape already worn down by thousands of years of rising seas. The people there may have known tides. They may have understood dangerous seasons. But ordinary experience cannot explain a wall of water crossing the North Sea. There was little high ground. There was little time. A strange change in the horizon, a sea behaving unlike itself, and then water powerful enough to carry away trees, shelters, animals, and people. Storegga is frightening because it was almost invisible until it happened. A coastal community could not look beneath the Norwegian Sea and see that the continental margin was unstable. They would meet the consequence only when it was already too late. After this period, traces of life on the remaining low parts of Doggerland fade from the record. It would be too simple to say one wave destroyed everything. The sea had been rising for millennia. Land had already been lost. But Storegga may have turned a long decline into a moment of ending. Some disasters destroy by crushing, some destroy by starving. Storegga destroyed by arriving from a place no one could watch. And if the sea seems dangerous only when storms are visible on its surface, Storegga reminds us that sometimes the threat begins far below. 2. The Black Sea Deluge, when a freshwater lake became a saltwater sea. Before the Black Sea took its modern form, one hypothesis suggests that it was once a lower freshwater lake. Around that lake, the land may have been fertile and attractive. Fresh water, fish, animals, flat shores, and early farming would have made it a powerful place for Neolithic communities. To them, the lakeshore was not scenery, it was survival. Then, salt water from the Mediterranean system may have forced its way through the Bosporus. In the most dramatic version of the event, the water did not arrive gently. It poured through for weeks or months, raising the lake level and pushing the shoreline inland. A field became mud. A house near the water became too close. A burial ground, a path, a cultivated plot used for generations disappeared under rising water. The frightening part is not only that water rose. The frightening part is that no one would know where it would stop. Every day, the shore would be different. Every day, the line of retreat would move. A farmer could carry belongings uphill, then do it again and again. But when the fertile shore itself turned into a saltwater basin, the old life had nowhere to return. Beneath the Black Sea today, scientists have found submerged shorelines, sediment changes from freshwater to marine conditions, and evidence of major environmental transformation. The speed and scale of the flood remain debated. Some researchers see a rapid catastrophe. Others argue for a slower process. But the basic idea remains disturbing. Land where people could have lived now lies under deep water. Perhaps the great flood stories of the Near East do not come from a single event, but it is easy to understand how memories of rising water, lost land, and forced migration could survive in culture for a very long time. When a culture burns, ash can remain. When it is buried, walls can sometimes be excavated. But when it is covered by salt water, silence becomes much heavier. The Black Sea does not only hold water, it may hold a piece of human history that has never been fully told. 1. The collapse of Lake Megachad. When the Green Sahara became desert. Today, when people imagine the Sahara, they usually picture sand, stone, heat, and distances so wide that human life feels small. But the Sahara was once different. In a past humid period, this region was far greener. There were grasslands, rivers, lakes, large animals, fish, crocodiles, hippos, giraffes, and human communities. At the center of that world was Lake Megachad, a gigantic freshwater body larger than many modern nations. The evidence is not fantasy. It appears in ancient shorelines seen from above, fossil pollen, lake sediments, and rock art showing animals that cannot live in the dry landscapes where the drawings now remain. People did not merely pass through the Sahara. They lived there. They hunted, herded, built communities, and moved through a land with water and grass. To them, the Sahara was not a desert. It was a homeland. Then the rains moved south. Changes in Earth's orbit and axial tilt shifted the West African monsoon system. Rainfall declined. At first, perhaps, no one would have understood that this was an ending. One dry season, one lower lake level, one herd moving farther than usual. But year after year, the unusual became normal. As grasses retreated, the ground held less moisture. As trees vanished, the local climate dried further. Dryness killed more vegetation, which made the land drier still. A feedback loop began, and the Green Sahara slowly turned toward dust, stone, and sand. Lake Megachad shrank. Rivers weakened. People had to leave places their ancestors may have known for generations. Some moved toward the Nile Valley and other more reliable water sources. The pressure of a drying climate may have helped concentrate populations near great rivers, where more complex societies later developed. This was not the kind of disaster that erases a city in a single day. It erased a way of life. A child born in the Green Sahara might have heard elders describe wider waters, thicker grass, and larger herds. That child would grow up in a drier world. Their children would inherit a drier one still. At some point, the homeland preserved in memory no longer matched the ground beneath their feet. The Sahara did not die with a roar. It dried. And sometimes that is the most frightening way for a world to disappear. The disasters are not just isolated geological accidents. They remind us that Earth has never promised to remain still for human comfort. A sea can become a desert. Land can become seafloor. A green world can become sand. A familiar shoreline can disappear over generations or under a single wave. The question becomes, how many blows can a civilization survive before it is no longer itself? Press the subscribe button so you don't miss any videos.